The DC Radio Show with Darren Cutrupi. My next guest loves the Rolling Stones, barracks for an AFL team called Hawthorn, is really the man responsible when it comes down to it for Canberra's birthday celebration coming up very shortly. He just happens to be the Deputy Chief Minister and Treasurer and Minister for God knows how many other things. Andrew Barr, welcome to the DC Radio Show.
Thank you very much, Darren. Good to be here.
So, the Canberra birthday, the actual day is March 11, so it's not very far away. What have you got planned for us?
It is a massive weekend. There's been years in the planning.
Yep.
It involves, I think, a coming together of the city around Lake Burley-Griffin, so our major public space in the city. There's a diverse range of programming, so I think 4 different concert stages, everything from symphonies through to Canberra influenced or based rock bands,
yep.
An Indigenous stage, multicultural performances. It's a big day of events, a gourmet food and wine trail and markets through the Commonwealth Park and Reconciliation Place.
Yep.
So activities north and south of the lake, which I think just shows what a fantastic event space this is for Canberra. I think the world's longest bubbly bars are a part of that. So many years ago, about 5 years ago, the local Wine Industry Association was commissioned to come up with some centenary bubbly, a Riesling and a Shiraz, and
yep.
they thousands of bottles made back in 2008.
Yep.
And so we get to drink them over the course of the day. It will be a really special occasion for Canberra.
Do you get a pre-event taste test or anything? Or?
Look, I have tried one of the centenary wines already. They did put a bottle or two out. I think a year ahead of our centenary. And yeah, it's looking pretty good.
Is it just me, or does it seem like we were talking about the centenary being in 2013? And it doesn't seem like that long ago, but back then it seemed like, oh yeah, that's ages away. Worry about that then.
And now it's snuck up on
us.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's true. And then how you fit a year-long program, so it's a big commitment for people to make, given just how many events that there are. So I think people can look at the program and decide which things they want to dip in and out of, what sorts of activities might appeal to them. And so from a sports perspective, it's the strongest sport and recreation program that the city's ever seen. We've had some firsts already. The Australian cricket team playing here for the first time. We've got the Kangaroos playing against New Zealand in the rugby league test coming up in April. This birthday long weekend sees a couple of really big events. Essendon playing the Giants under lights at Manuka Oval on the Friday night, so the first footy game under lights at Manuka. On the Saturday night, it's the grudge match of the Super Rugby Championship, the Brumbies against the Waratahs. So big sporting program, Black Opal on the Sunday, and then the one very big day on the public holiday Monday. So a packed weekend, something for everybody. You can get more information on the Canberra 100 website.
And the one thing that hasn't been publicised very loudly at all is that the Raiders are finally going to let Manly come back and play them after about 6 years.
Yes, it's been a while.
That's not till about August, so it won't be a good day for Canberra Raiders fans. But at least the game's going to be on. So.
Well, look, yes, and one of the things, each of our National League teams, so across the whole range of sports, are picking one match during the year that will be, the big centenary game that they'll wear the special centenary strip. So for the birthday weekend coming up, it's the Brumbies who'll be in the centenary yellow outfits. So that'll be a real collector's item, that particular footy jumper.
I've asked you to pick some songs to play over the hour as well. The Rolling Stones, now, if anyone follows you on Twitter, which countless thousands of people do, they know you're a bit of a tragic...
I might pick up on a little bit of a fanatic on the Stones.
Give me Shelter. What's that song mean for you?
Okay, well, this song, it's probably the defining song for them in the 1960s. It's most often related now to a particular outdoor concert they held, free outdoor concert they held at the Altamont Speedway in California in the late 60s, where they made the mistake of using the Hells Angels as their security, and with 150,000 people at this free concert, and obviously a lot of drugs and booze going on, things got a bit out of hand by the time the Stones got on stage, and unfortunately someone was murdered in the crowd, and that sort of became an infamous incident. And the Stones didn't tour again for 2 or 3 years after that experience, and it in many ways is seen as sort of slamming the door on that era of the 60s of peace, love and happiness, and certainly in the context of California, where that movement really sprung from. So this is the opening track to the Let It Bleed album, which is one of their best, I think, and features the vocals of what was then a very young Mary Clayton, who I think you listen to the track, you'll see it's an amazing performance, and I think one of the Stones' all-time classic songs.
You've said it all, nothing more for me. Let's hit it. On the DC radio show, the Rolling Stones, a favourite of Andrew Barr, and Give Me Shelter. Hey, with that introduction, you could almost do a show on the station, I think, Andrew.
Well, look, I do dabble at times into doing the odd community radio show. Yes, my passion for music is reasonably well known. It's not just the Stones; they're probably my favourite band, but I have a pretty eclectic music taste, as you'll no doubt discover in the hour ahead.
Yes, absolutely. We'll get into some more music. We'll take a short break here on the DC Radio Show, and when we come back, another one of Andrew's favourite groups, but a little bit more about the actual day of Canberra's birthday. The DC Radio Show with Darren Cutrupi on Valley FM 89.5, and in the chair with us tonight, well, actually, he's at the Raiders. He's at the Raiders season launch, but we did this a little bit earlier through the magic of technology.
Indeed, yes.
Oh, you'd want to go to a Raiders season launch, I don't know, but anyway. Andrew, we were talking earlier about the birthday, the big day of March 11. What's the background to the birthday? Obviously, it's when Canberra was born, but can you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. Well, I think that there's a common misunderstanding that Canberra came about just because of a conflict between Sydney and Melbourne around who should be the capital, and they couldn't agree. Sydney and Melbourne are still fighting to this day over which city they think is the premier city in the country.
Go Team Sydney.
We all know that the decision to found a national capital, to bring a series of colonies together into a nation, and to have a new national capital was a long and torturous process. And the discussions around federation started way back in the late 1800s and took quite some time. The federal parliament sat in Melbourne through until 1927, but in that intervening period, you've got a world war, you've got some difficult economic circumstances. The formation of Canberra and the process of laying a foundation stone through to the federal parliament coming here took many years. It's often misunderstood that those 13 years from 1913 to 1927 before the parliament moved here, that there wasn't a lot in Canberra at that time. So this period that we're celebrating really goes to look at the foresight of those, and they were founding fathers. Let's be frank here; it was all blokes at that time. But then, when we think about the design of the city, we think about the contribution that Walter and Marion Griffin made to our city, and I think it is a timely opportunity to reflect upon that. And whilst we take that moment to think about the journey over 100 years, I think it also is the pivotal moment to think about, well, where's the city going in its next 100 years? What ideas, what passion will be brought to that task of the city evolving beyond just that being the seat of federal government to taking on a greater role in this region? What opportunities will there be for further economic development and growth outside of the public sector? And that's certainly a challenge that sits with me in the economic development portfolio at the moment, but one that the government is focused on. And I think interestingly also you are starting to see through this year and the attention that it's bringing to the city more engagement from the rest of Australia. The observation I'd make is Australians are very proud of their capital when they're overseas. I've seen it in many occasions where people talk up Canberra and Australia, when they're talking to foreigners. They can be a little bit more bashful and sometimes have a bit of a go at us domestically. But in the end, you think about the pride Americans have in Washington, and we want to translate, that sort of pride into our national capital. And in a way, Canberra is an unfinished project. It's we're at a certain point in our development. There's still a further journey for us, and one need only look at Washington and Canberra to see, that they are ahead of us in that journey. But I think we're catching up. Yeah,
they're a bit older too.
Yes.
I know when I travel through America a fair bit, and I always say it's the Washington of Australia, and people tend to sort of get that.
Yeah.
Although the first time I went to DC, when you leave the airport and head in towards the city, you start going, am I in DC or am I in Canberra?
Yes,
Isn't that amazing?
I was struck by that too. That there were, there's some vistas and some parts of DC that I just felt like I could be in part of Canberra, and that's obviously there's a national capital, national institution, national monument element to that, but then also a sense of some degree of planning. The interesting thing for Canberra's future is to what extent we create an environment that allows some organic, spontaneous development and activity to occur. And I think that's the tension, that there's a generation of Canberrans who fell in love with the absolute ordered, planned element of our city. And I think there's a younger generation who crave a little bit more spontaneity, creativity, and look for maybe some organised chaos might be the compromise, and that's part of the challenge, I think, in the next century for Canberra.
We'll continue talking about that in a moment, but Queen is another group that you are a big fan of, and the second song you picked, Good Old Fashioned Lover Boy.
I love Queen. Been a big fan for years. This particular track, perhaps not one of their most famous ones. It's from the mid '70s. So I've also selected songs throughout the hour that cover a number of different decades of music. But this one, maybe is a little bit more personal and might describe how I'd like to be considered.
Here it is, Queen, Good Old Fashioned Lover Boy on the DC Radio Show. Greatest hits, and one of the selections from our guest tonight, Andrew Barr. Can you still cop Queen today without Freddie Mercury?
Well, it's obviously not the same. I've seen some of the documentaries. They've obviously had some shows on the ABC recently, looking back at the history. Look, they're very fine musicians. But I think Freddie was it would be like the Stones without Mick Jagger, the Doors without Jim Morrison, frankly also in excess without Michael Hutchence, I think. But look, the love of the music is clearly there for generations beyond. So some of the work they've been doing with musicals and the like, I think good on them. There's this music needs to be brought to another generation.
Did you forget one comparison there? The ACT government without Katie Gallagher, for instance?
Well, obviously, yes. And, it remains to be seen whether the Canberra Liberals without Zed Seselja will be quite the same.
We were talking about Canberra and its image. Do you think it matters that majority of Australians see Canberra as the place where the pollies come and do all their business or whatever, depending on your view of politics, and it's just a place full of public servants, when anyone here in Canberra knows that's not what the place is about?
Look, I think it would be better if we had a broader image. We will always be associated with politics and government, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because in the end, the big decisions about the nation's future are made in this city. And the public servants who work here contribute to that. They're making a big contribution to the nation, and I think that's something that should be celebrated. And I would hope that there's as we look ahead, there's a greater recognition of that contribution, because countries don't operate effectively without good government and good public service provision. That's pretty critical to living in a great country. And as we look ahead for this city, the challenges that are there in terms of threats of large scale reductions in the public sector are serious for Canberra. And I think we're a stronger city than we were in 1996. It's bigger. It's a more diverse population. And as we're older, I think you're seeing more people are retiring and staying in Canberra rather than going down to the coast. I think the quality of health services here and family connections, are dictating that that the people really do want to stay in the city, and they can't be sacked. They've got retirement incomes, and so I think the economy's stronger. Which is not to say though that you wouldn't feel the impact if we've got about 210,000 jobs in Canberra. If you take 20,000 out, that's a big chunk of employment, and obviously flows through into retail, into hospitality, and all of the other areas of the economy.
We're going to take a short break here on the DC Radio Show, and we'll play a song that sort of, it's from an album title that sort of goes with that sentiment from Canberrans. It's the Whitlams from Love This City and Blow Up the Pokies. We might talk about that a little bit after this break, and then hear from the Whitlams on the DC Radio Show. Your music, your station, Valley FM 89.5 with the Whitlams and Blow Up the Pokies. And this is the DC Radio Show with Andrew Barr, our Deputy Chief Minister, Treasurer, Minister for Sport and Recreation.
Tourism and Events, Community Services. Yeah, it's a fair amount.
Quite a few,
across, but interesting areas to work in.
So with the birthday, is this just something the ACT government is organising, or is there partnerships with community groups, and I assume the feds have tipped in a bit of cash as well?
So it's really been a whole of community and whole of nation response and commitment. So the federal government provided funding. We've had support from other state and territory governments, particularly in supporting the very strong theatre program at the Canberra Theatre. So you've got performances from state and territory theatre groups. That's been a terrific contribution from those governments. At a community level, there's been a number of funding programs that have allowed existing events to become bigger and better for the centenary year, and to allow organisations to put on centenary specific events. So you are seeing it from the smallest grassroots organisation in Canberra right through to the federal government and the Prime Minister's involvement. So it's been it's been an interesting project to be involved with. I've had particular focus on the sports side and the tourism promotion side as sport and tourism minister. I think it just reflects, obviously, a once in 100-year opportunity to market the city, and the exposure we've got nationally and internationally from this year already has been more than the value we could possibly have afforded if we were just buying ads. So it's been really good for Canberra.
Does the government have targets on measuring whether this has been successful? So 2 million visits in the year, or
our normal tourism flow is around the 2 million mark at a domestic level, and about 150,000 international tourists. So we certainly want to exceed those benchmarks. There's strong programming throughout the year, so we'd be looking for more than 500,000 visitors in each quarter of the year. And if we are successful in getting international flights into the new Canberra Airport international component that will be open later this year, then of course our capacity to increase our international tourism take is considerable, particularly if there's a link in via Singapore, but also from New Zealand, which is Australia's biggest international market. And we know Kiwis have done Sydney, Melbourne and the Gold Coast to death. They are looking for new experiences in Australia. So if we're able to get a direct flight into Canberra Airport from either or Wellington or Auckland or both, then that will put us in a really good position to increase our international tourism take.
Do you have a message for Canberrans, as well as those who are outside of the ACT, on what you would like them to do for the centenary? So Canberrans at least be involved in one event or 5 events through the year, and everyone outside of Canberra at least come and visit us once and check it out.
And I think one of the things that I know I've been doing with family and friends is sharing the program with them and working out the sorts of events that they'd like to come and see, and inviting them in either to stay with us or there's too many of them to come and stay in the hotels that of which we have many and of high quality. So that's certainly something very practical that people can do, is to invite their friends and relatives to come and take part in many of the activities within the surrounding region. So within 2 or 3 hours drive of Canberra, we would anticipate a number of the big events, the big sporting events and the big cultural events will draw people in, because they would otherwise have to go to Sydney or Melbourne to see that sort of entertainment or content. So we expect that will go well. In terms of individual Canberrans, and I think there's something to be involved in at basically every level. Whether that's attending some of the major events or being involved in the parties in your street or down at your local shops. Just take a moment during the year to reflect upon how lucky we are to live in this city, in this country at this moment of time. And then we really want to engage with people after the centenary year to what are the legacies from that year. What can we build on? What new things do we want in our annual program of events? And I think already the success of the Multicultural Festival this year, record crowds, a much larger footprint for the event, I think shows that we, in making that change for the centenary year, that was the right decision, and that event can go from strength to strength. There are numerous other ones that will become part of our annual event calendar now as a result of of going well in the centenary year.
We've done the 60s, we've done the 70s, and we went through to, the noughties, but we better go back to the 80s. Tears for Fears.
Look, yeah, so I was a teenager in the 80s, so pretty much every song that was released at that time, I would have either taped off the radio. That's what you had to do in those days before
your mixtapes.
Yes, that's right.
You know what I played earlier in the hour is a couple of hours ago now. I Wear My Sunglasses at Night.
Corey Hart. Yes, I remember that from Countdown. So that was another great tradition. On a Sunday night at 6 o'clock, you'd probably be in your pajamas by then and be waiting for Molly Meldrum to host that show. So I love the 80s. Very hard just to pick one track. I've chosen this one. Tears for Fears had a number of hits. This again probably wasn't their highest profile one, but it has been covered a number of times and featured perhaps in the most high profile sense in more recent times in the film Donnie Darko. But this, in a way, just sums up a little bit about what living in the 80s was like. Tears for Fears, Mad World.
On Valley FM 89.5. On the DC Radio Show with Darren Cutrupi, Tears for Fears and Mad World, going back to the 80s. And my special guest, Andrew Barr, who loves that song but loves all the 80s. Well, most of it.
Pretty much. I mean, even 25, 30 years on, it's hard to find too much there that's really bad. Probably, if I was forced to nominate worst song of the 80s, it would be Mark Jackson, the AFL footballer, who did I'm an Individual,
and you can't fool me.
I don't think that one stood the test of time.
What a segue into AFL Hawthorn. What's this connection? Explain it,
well,
please.
This goes back to the 80s as well.
Yes.
So in 1983, as a 10-year-old. So I've been born in New South Wales. I used to be called the rugby league computer. That was, when I was 5, I knew every rugby league stat you could possibly imagine. And so, all through that period, we had a family friend who was from Melbourne. It was, pretty insistent that I should have a team in this thing that was, being known as the VFL. Yeah. And I'd resisted because I was a rugby league fan. Used to go for Western Suburbs, and then when the Raiders came in to the competition, which would have been, I think, 82.
82, yeah.
So I didn't go for them in their first year, but I started that transition away from West. I think Terry Lamb left West and went to play for Canterbury around that time. So that probably was the end of my strong emotional attachment to Western Suburbs, and started going for the Raiders. But anyway, we're talking AFL. So amidst all of this, we're still fairly insistent that come on, you've got to have a VFL team. It just happened at that time that this family friend was A, a Hawthorn supporter, and B, the Hawks weren't doing too badly. So in 1983, they won the grand final. Good, yeah. So it was probably a pretty easy decision for a 10-year-old to go for the winning team. I then had to suffer through the 84 and 85 grand finals where we got flogged by Essendon by progressively larger margins. And one of the funny things, sort of 30 years on, in finally meeting Kevin Sheedy through his involvement with the Giants, was to reach peace, to forgive him for those Essendon premierships in 84 and 85. But yeah, that's how it all started. Started going for Hawthorn in 83. Obviously a great period through the 80s and early 90s, and then we went, I think, 17 years without winning a premiership. But I really only got to see my first live game of AFL at the MCG in about 1998. So,
wow.
Although it's perhaps commonly thought that I've been an AFL tragic forever, I have to be honest and say I'm a more recent convert in the last 15, 20 years or so. And now, yes, I'm pretty passionate about the Hawks. A good weekend for me, arriving at work on Monday morning, as if the Brumbies, the Raiders and the Hawks have all had a win. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I could even live with 1 out of 3, but I'm pretty miserable on a Monday morning if all 3 teams have lost.
Notice to government departments, do not have meetings with Andrew Barr on a Monday morning
when
it's been 0-3.
It's the Treasury Department who have that joy on Monday mornings, so they'll wear the brunt of my footy moods.
We'll have to send them a copy of this. So back to that forgiving. Have you actually forgiven Essendon, and did Sheeds give you a shoulder to cry on?
Oh, look, he was very good about it, and promised that at some point he'd deliver a Giants premiership, and we could celebrate that in Canberra.
Okay, well, let's hope he's not dreaming, but being a rugby league supporter...
A few years away, I'd say, before that's going to happen.
Now, we're going to finish off. The last song we're going to go with here is Same Love, featuring Mary Lambert and Macklemore and Ryan Lewis. And it's a song with a pretty obvious message, isn't it, when you listen to it?
It certainly does, yeah. So this was released late last year. I can't say I'm a huge devotee of hip-hop, but this one... made it ranked pretty highly in Triple J's Hottest 100. Another thing I've been following pretty intently for 20 years. Although I must say, as I get closer to 40, I know fewer of the songs. But this one, I think, is one of the standout tracks of 2012. I actually think this is a better song than the Thrift Shop that ended up being number 1 in the Hottest 100. Look, a very strong message. A cause I'm very passionate about, something that I will keep on campaigning for until we see the day that all Australians are equal, and that will certainly be the culmination of a very long campaign, not just for me, but for for thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of Australians who support this. So, look, a great song and a really important message.
Not that I've thought about this much, but obviously, I've known you for many years now, a decade and a half or 2 or something. How good is it that you can be in the job you're in and in the position, and your sexuality is not an issue whatsoever? Yeah, it's only an issue when the issue itself is being discussed and being debated.
I think that is a reflection of how far Canberra's come. I mean, you'd asked me when I first came out, back in the 90s, late 90s, that perhaps wasn't my expectation of what would happen. So, I mean, look, there are still pockets of homophobia. There's pockets of nastiness that you see, and from time to time, people who will disagree with political decision I've taken, or a stance I take on an issue not related to this, will sometimes dip into some pretty ordinary language, but look, I think that's more a reflection on them than where Canberra is now. And yes, I think it's a fantastic thing that it's not really an issue, nor should it be. We live in a diverse community, and I think it's terrific that regardless of your sexuality, you can aspire to a variety of different roles in our community, and that's a good thing. So, look, to the extent that me being where I am is, absolutely demonstrates that in the way that Michael Kirby can demonstrate you can be a High Court Justice. Penny Wong and others federally. I just think that's a fantastic thing, and we're seeing, I think we're seeing a greater level of openness. In not just our community here in Canberra, but more broadly across the nation and around the world, and that can only be good for our community.
We just need a federal parliament now that's willing to go that next step.
Yeah, look, and I'm absolutely convinced that that moment well, that time will come, that
Yeah.
moment will happen. I'm disappointed that Australia is now lagged behind the UK, led by a Conservative administration
Yeah.
who brought in that change, and obviously the President Obama has been very clear around his view, and
Yeah.
a number of US states have made this change. So. There is a growing sense of momentum and inevitability, and I would hope that the Labor Party, having changed its policy position
Yeah.
at our national conference about 18 months ago, will be at the forefront of this in the years ahead, and there will be a day when, in a not too distant future, when the Australian Parliament votes for equality.
Let's listen to Same Love on the DC Radio Show. The DC Radio Show with Andrew Barr tonight, picking his favourite songs for the hour, and the last one we're going to get to play, Same Love by Macklemore and Ryan Lewis featuring Mary Lambert. We were speaking about Federal Parliament just before the song. I can't have you on without asking you, Julia Gillard, is she going to be there by the time we have this election?
Look, I suspect so. I just don't think there's that much sort of desire for yet another leadership change. I think the Labor Party has some significant challenges heading into this election, and I'm not sure that that's overcome simply by changing leaders. I don't think that's a particularly good culture to adopt for a party, and so I certainly hope that that there will be people will tough out this difficult period, that when we get closer to September, that the focus will be on policy and what the alternate choices are for this country. And from our perspective locally, we're thinking more about the priorities that we share with the federal government, particularly in education, in disability reform, and in health.
Yep.
Where we agree with the direction that they're putting forward, that it can make a difference to people's lives, and that at this level of government in the ACT, our principal responsibility is around delivering those services and ensuring that those good policy intentions at a national level have a practical outcome on the ground for people, and that's one of the attractive things about this level of government. People often observe that the most important stuff happens federally. I disagree. Actually, I think particularly as we live in a more globalised world, that it's what happens locally and the things that you can actually impact on as an individual, as a group of individuals, and as a community in your local area are the things that make the biggest difference to your day-to-day life. So from our perspective, that's got to be the focus, and I'm pleased that there is, at least on the NDIS, a bipartisan agreement. So we know we'll be focusing on delivering that and making a difference in people's lives in the coming years.
I suppose in 10 seconds, does it really matter who the federal Labor leader is, considering all the polls and all the talk is that there's not a hope in hell that they'll be re-elected?
Well, look, I think in the end it's about policy,
Yep.
And it's about options and choices for the future. And I think a little bit less personality politics and a bit more focus on what people will actually do and what they will actually achieve will be the best thing for Australia.
You're hopeful, aren't you? Note to media, please listen.
You never give up. You never give up.
Andrew Barr, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciated you coming on the show and sharing with us about Canberra and about footy and playing some of your favourite songs.
Some of my great passions in life.
Absolutely.
Canberra, footy and music.
That pretty well sums it up, doesn't it?
It does.
Thank you, and we'll catch you up again sometime on the show.
Terrific. Thank you.